Jesus sucks Simon in. Simon is sitting in judgment. And Jesus says, who do you think loves God more? The one who was forgiven a little or a lot? Now, you got to be careful, because we can get sucked into the story as well. As we hear it, we go, what's wrong with that Simon? And we begin to judge Simon. Be careful with Jesus. He's sneaky. In the story today, Simon has a dinner party. He invites the elites to come and join him. It's a dinner, a banquet, and a theological discussion. Now, those who were the invited guests would sit down at table, they would eat, they would have a discussion, they would partake in it. But whenever these events happened, the gates and the doors to the house were left open, so that others from the community could come and go as they pleased. They could kind of listen to what was going on, but they couldn't participate in the discussions. It's kind of like the Commonwealth Club that's streaming on NPR. You can listen to parts or all of it if you like, but you got no say in the discussion. And so the woman in this story could easily walk in. Now, the woman in the story is not one of the Marys we know. It says that she is a woman of the city, which means she's homeless. And so she comes to this dinner party and she watches them eat, and she makes her way to Jesus. And then she does the outrageous. She anoints his feet and she wipes his feet with her hair. No Middle Eastern woman would let her hair down in public. Scandalous. She's a sinner, it says, though we're not told what that means for her. The poor can't always afford virtue. Luke agrees with Simon about that. It's just that Luke and Jesus don't judge her. They don't reject her and they don't look down upon her as Simon did. See, Simon is a good Christian boy. He does all the right things. He goes to church every Sunday. He tithes. Keeps all the rules. He's nice to those around him. But the problem is, he thinks that earns God's love. He thinks that's good enough. Jesus says to him and to us when we feel like that, good luck with that. God's love is not about what we do. We can't do enough. We can't earn it. This is kind of where we enter the story. The contrast is not between sinner and non-sinner. It is between the forgiven and the not forgiven. Between the grateful and the not grateful. Now, lest we get puffed up, whenever we come to the communion table, we celebrate the truth that Jesus continues to eat and drink with sinners. If we weren't sinners, we would not need to receive communion. You get that? When Jesus is speaking of sins, he's not talking about the naughty things we do. Right? He's talking about anything that separates you from God. Whatever gets in the way of that relationship. We don't know what it is for the woman, but we know what it is for Simon. He thinks he's good enough, and so doesn't need to do anything. It keeps him from fully living. When Jesus points out that she is a sinner, he's really pointing out the fact that all people fall short of God. Doesn't matter who you are. None of us measure up fully. We're human. The contrast is not about sin and how one stands in relationship to the law. Right? It's not about how good you are, what percentage of good you are, which laws you keep and which you don't. It's about finding forgiveness and new life. In the story, the woman finds it. Simon, we don't know. Which of these two, Jesus asks, is closer to God? Which one loves God more? The one who's forgiven much. That's what Jesus is saying. You notice that Jesus eats with both groups. A couple of weeks ago, we looked back when Jesus called the first disciple. He called the tax collector to follow him. The tax collector was so excited he got together all of his sinner friends, and Jesus sat down and ate with them. All the religious people said, "What's he eating with them for?" And then today, he eats with all of the good people, all of the righteous, all of those who have power and prestige. Jesus comes to everyone. Now, the woman has it hard. She knows she's disappointed God. You know, there are times in our life we know we've disappointed God. That can bring despair and loneliness because we haven't measured up to what we think we should. Yet it also can drive one closer to God. When you realize you need God's love, you're more likely to seek God out. Corrie ten Boom speaks that truth when she says, "No pit is so deep that God is not deeper." No pit is too deep that God is not deeper. Do you know that in your life of faith? I suspect many of you do, not most. Hope and forgiveness is always available, always waiting. Simon was, in the words of Mark Twain, a good man in the worst sense of the word. Let us not be good Christian people in the worst sense of the word. David Seamans, who was a pastor in Wilmore, Kentucky, said that people have scars. Everyone has scars inside that no one sees. And he used the image of the redwoods or the sequoias. If you go to any of those parks, national parks that have those trees, there's usually one that has been cut down and you see a cross-section that has all of the rings of life of that tree. The naturalist can point out to you where different things have happened in the life of that tree. In one ring, there is a terrible drought year, and so there's not a lot of growth. In that developmental history, there's also a year or two that had just simply too much rain. The tree wasn't ready for it. In another ring, you can see where lightning struck the tree. That ring is covered up by other rings and other rings. There's a ring where there was a forest fire that almost destroyed the tree. Other rings show blight, disease. All of that is embedded in the heart of that tree. It's not visible until it's gone, until it's cut down. He said that's kind of the way it is with us. Each of us have those rings of life that show difficulty, show pain, show hurt, show normal growth. It's all there, but it's concealed under our protective mask, under our facades. They are the scars of past painful hurts. The things we wanted but never got. The things we wanted but never got. The things we got but never wanted. They're in us, in all of us. We all have scars. Many of you read any of the books by James Michener? What are those books? Centennial? Hawaii? Alaska? His first book that became a play for Rodgers and Hammerstein? South Pacific. Adventures of the South Pacific. Well, the thing that makes his stories wonderful is the depth that he goes. He fleshes out extensive genealogies, deep cultural roots for the people in his books. Now, ironically enough, this is a man who never had a birth certificate. He did not know either where he was born or when he was born. He was abandoned at a very early age, and he was adopted by a widow woman named Michener. Maybe that gives you a sense of why it's so important for him to do extensive genealogies. Now, despite his kind and generous spirit, his accomplishments raised the ire of an unknown family member. This family member would write nasty notes to him whenever he got any notoriety at all. Whenever he gained some fame or got some space in the newspaper, the relative would sign his letters a real missioner. Even after his Pulitzer Prize, this relative charged missioner would be besmirching the good missioner name and denounced him as a fraud. He said missioner had no real right to use that name. The phrase that deeply got under James' skin was, "Who in hell do you think you are, trying to be better than you are?" The final letter came in 1976 after he received Presidential Medal of Freedom Award from President Ford. No, read, "Still using a name that isn't yours, still a fraud, still trying to be better than you are." In his memoir, he wrote, "The words of that cry are burned into my soul." But he also confesses he was right in all of these accusations. "I've spent my life trying to be better than I was and am a brother to all who have the same aspirations." He is a brother to Mary, who desperately wants to love and be loved by God. Bass Mitchell's from West Virginia. He tells about his first job that was in a grocery store. He was a stock boy, and after a while, he got his own aisle. He was moving up. And he said every week, trucks would bring in hundreds of boxes of cans, food, and as they opened those up, inevitably, there would be a can or two or a box or two that was damaged. Maybe a can had lost its label. Maybe it had a dent in it. And he said oftentimes, we would take those items, because we couldn't put them on the shelves, nobody would buy them, and we'd put them in the front in some sort of container and put a sign on it that said, "Damaged goods, cheap." You seen those? Mm-hmm. You're always tempted, don't you? Probably like me to never buy one. Well, he said, that's kind of how it is with us. In our lives, sometimes we see ourselves as damaged goods. Mitchell talks about seeing a woman who was being interviewed on television. She was a single mother. She had been divorced. She was asked how it was to be a single mother, and was there any romance in your life now? She said, "I look at myself as damaged goods." There are parts of our lives that make us think that. Think of ourselves as damaged goods, as less than we should be. I wonder if how Mary felt today is much the same. Did she see herself as damaged goods? Do you sometimes feel like you are damaged goods before God? If you do, this story is for you. The one who made the connection with God in this story was the damaged goods, not the one who thought they were perfect. The question is, will you trust God or will you trust yourself? Will you trust God or will you trust the things you do, the good stuff? There's a pastor who saw a former burglar kneeling beside him as he took communion. After the release of this burglar, he was converted and became a Christian worker. After the service, the judge was walking home with the pastor, and the judge said, "Did you notice who was kneeling beside me at the communion rail?" The pastor said, "Yes, I noticed, but I didn't think you did." As they walked along in silence a little while, the judge said, "What a miracle of grace." The pastor said, "Yes, what a miracle of grace." The judge said, "But to whom do you refer?" The pastor said, "Well, the conversion of the convict." The judge said, "I wasn't referring to him at all. I was thinking of myself." The pastor was surprised and said, thinking of yourself, I don't understand. The judge said, yes, it didn't cost that burglar very much to get converted when he came out of jail. He had nothing but a history of crime behind him. And when he saw Jesus as the Savior, he knew there was salvation, hope, and joy for him. And he knew how much he needed the help. But look at me. I was taught from my earliest infancy to live as a gentleman. That my word was my bond. I was to say my prayers, go to church, take communion, and so on. I went through Oxford, took my degrees, was called to the bar, and eventually became a judge. Pastor, nothing but the grace of God could have caused me to admit that I was a sinner on the level with a burglar. It took much grace to forgive me for all of my pride and self-deception. To get me to admit that I was no better in the eyes of God than that convict I sent to prison. Perhaps he knew of today's gospel lesson. See, Simon was a good Christian boy. He was good, he was religious, he was faithful. The problem was that he thought that was good enough. He couldn't let go of his goodness to see the reality that was inside. That thought made him think he was better than others. Danny Cox, former Air Force pilot, he helped pioneer the supersonic flights. But he said there was a problem in those early jets in the process of ejecting the pilots from the plane. Some pilots made the mistake of holding on to the seat after they've been ejected. I mean, it makes sense. You're flying out there and you want to hold on to anything you can. The problem was, as long as they held on to the seat, their chutes wouldn't open. They had to let go of the seat before their chutes would open. So if they held on to their own death. So often in our lives, we hold on to the goodness we think we have. And we don't let go. We don't trust God.
There's a lot of letters in this next story, so I hope you can hang with me. You might even want to take notes about the letters. Peter Nash talks about the Wycliffe Bible translators. There was a tribal people in Cameroon called the HDI. Lee Bramlett went there to be a translator. And he discovered that verbs in the HDI language consistently ended in one of three vowels: A, I, or U. Depending on which one was used, it would change the meaning of the word. You could tell the meaning of the word by the ending. That appeared to be true of every word in their language except for one, and that was the word love. When it comes to the word love, the HDI people used only an I or an A for the last letter, never a U. The two words for love are DVI and DVA, no DVU. Are you hanging with me? All right. Lee asked the elders to help him understand why there was no U in this word alone. And so he said to them, could you DVI your wife? They said, sure. That would mean that the wife you had loved, but that love now is gone. Then he said, could you DVA your wife? They said, yes. That would be the kind of love that depended on the wife's actions. She would be loved as long as she remained faithful and cared for her husband well. Lee then asked the question, could you DVU your wife? Everyone laughed. Of course not, they said. If you said that, you would have to keep loving your wife no matter what she did, even if she never got you water, never made your meals, even if she committed adultery. You would be compelled to keep on loving her. Then he asked them a very important question. He said, could God DVU the people? Complete silence for several minutes. Then tears began to roll down some of the faces of these weathered elderly gentlemen. Finally they said, do you know what that would mean? This would mean that God would keep loving us over and over, millennia after millennia, while all that time we rejected His great love. He is compelled to love us even though we have sinned more than any people. In today's gospel, Jesus is saying God is a DVU God.
God is not constrained by the things we do. For Jesus, forgiveness is not a doctrine to be believed. It is rather a feast to be received. It is a party to which all are invited. Lay aside all that keeps you from loving God fully. Your faults and your strengths. Receive forgiveness and new hope. Bob Olmsted was a pastor in Palo Alto for a time. He told about a friend of his who was a pastor in nearby Campbell Church. Her name was Roberta Corson. Bobby wrote in her newsletter about an experience she had while she was at church, and Bob reflected that. In the newsletter, she said, "It had been a long day. All the other staff had gone, and it was dark outside. Yet another knock came on the door. She says, I opened it, and there stood one of the street people we know and frequently help. She wanted money. Her check wouldn't be here till tomorrow. Since we don't give out money," Bobby said, "the response would normally be to take them to Burger King for a meal. Frankly," she said, "I was so tired, I simply said, I can't really help you now, and the office is closed." I said that a few times. Without a moment's hesitation, the homeless woman said, "But your light is on. Your light is on." God's light is indeed shining on you, bringing a light that should be on as well. What will you do with the light God has given you? May you use it in service to others. May you use it as a light that points the way to God, who loves all.